I'd like to acknowledge the Darkinjung and Gurringi peoples as traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future and recognise their continuing connection and contribution to the land, waters and community. I extend this respect to all Indigenous people here today. I live on the central coast of New South Wales, located between Sydney and the Hunter Valley. Over the past few weeks, I've purposely explored my local area for evidence of Indigenous culture and evidence of appreciation of Indigenous people, cultures and country. The Indigenous history of the area is readily apparent in the Indigenous names of many of the towns or suburbs on the Central Coast. I live in Edelong, meaning drinking place. Nearby are Yamina and Woy Woy, Patonga and Kincumber. These names remind me that the first people in this region were Aboriginal people, and that many places on the coast are likely to have been named thousands of years before colonisation. Exploring Edelong and neighbouring suburbs, I found small galleries selling art sourced from Indigenous communities outside the Central Coast, and shops selling Aboriginal souvenirs for the tourists, but little evidence of appreciation of Aboriginal culture in my area. Nothing that could be considered more than tokenistic. It seemed that beyond place names, Indigenous culture and history was largely invisible. While I did not have to look long to find monuments for those lost in war on foreign lands, there are no monuments for those who died locally, resisting British invasion, occupation and colonisation. Nothing to remember the first Australians who died bravely trying to protect the land that had been their home for thousands of years, and protect their culture, the world's oldest. For in Australian history, it has long been pretended by many that this land was terra nullius, an empty land, a land belonging to no one, when we know today, as well as Captain Cook and his peers knew when they came here and made the claim, that the land was inhabited. Terra nullius denied the Aboriginal people's humanity and their existence. It was a claim that led to dispossession, segregation and assimilation, to years of systematic discrimination and oppression, humiliation and demoralisation of Indigenous people. It was a claim that would have a devastating impact for generations to come, robbing Indigenous people of not only their land and culture, but their most basic human rights. I believe it is for these reasons that Indigenous cultures remain inadequately visible and inadequately valued in my local area. When the British invaded, this land was home to the Darkinjung and Gurringi peoples. The boundaries of these groups are uncertain and subject to controversy, and much of the Darkinjung and Gurringi people's history has been lost as a result of colonisation. But beyond the suburban streets, shops and cafes that I have come to think of as my local environment, at the Bulgandry Aboriginal site located in the Brisbane Water National Park, I found rock engravings by the Gurringi people. Most notably, a large engraving of a man wearing an impressive headdress thought to represent an ancestral hero, Bulgandry. The age of the art is unknown, but it's at least 200 years old and is thought to be possibly 10 times that. It is here alone in the bush that I began to grapple with the meaning of country for Indigenous people, reflecting on the fact that every part of their lives is connected to country, and how fundamental that connection is to culture and identity. It was here that I was able to connect with Indigenous culture and feel challenged to think about my own relationship to the land that I live on. I reflect on all that has taken place on this land and feel shame as a descendant of the British invaders, and guilt because I've benefited from the losses of Indigenous people and white privilege. I have been ignorant and subsequently indifferent and unresponsive to the continuing inequality and pain that Indigenous people experience today. But from this shame and guilt and the awareness of my ignorance, I hope comes a humility that will enable me to work respectfully and collaboratively with Indigenous communities to support the recognition of their right to self-determination and to work towards genuine reconciliation.